Bonjour and welcome viewers and students to Let's Speak French, Parlons Français. These lessons on basic French are short and easy, and if you follow the program regularly, I can guarantee you that very soon you will be able to speak and understand French quite easily. Today we are going to begin the third chapter of the program. This chapter is divided into 5 lessons. Today's class will be on the present tense conjugation of verbs with ER ending. This lesson has been divided into 3 sections. In the first section, I will explain the basic concept of verb conjugation and the various types of verbs that exist in French. In the next section, we'll learn how to conjugate a few common verbs with ER ending. And in the third section, I'll provide a text to revise what we learned in today's class. In this lesson, I will introduce you to words related to everyday activity, such as our daily routine and habits. Let's begin the lesson by taking a close look at verbs in general before learning about ER ending verbs in French. A verb is an action word which expresses an activity, either a mental activity such as thinking, imagining, or a physical activity like talking, running, etc. The verb is an integral part of a sentence and you cannot form a sentence without a verb. However, it is equally important to use the appropriate form of the verb. The basic form of a verb is called the infinitive form. In the infinitive form, the verb is not conjugated. In fact, all conjugations are derived from the infinitive form. We will examine this in detail in the second section, where I explain how ER ending verbs are conjugated. But for the moment, let us see what is meant by conjugation. In a sentence, the verb is seldom used in its infinitive form. Every verb must undergo a grammatical process known as conjugation. A conjugated verb is a verb that has been altered from its infinitive form to communicate various informations about the subject associated with the verb. This information includes the person, number, gender of the subject, as well as the tense and mood of the sentence. We are already familiar with the first 3 informations. These reveal whether the subject is singular or plural, masculine or feminine. The tense of the verb means the time that the verb conveys, such as present, past or future. In French, there are 14 tenses, 7 simple and 7 compound tenses. A simple tense means that the verb is conjugated by itself without an auxiliary verb, while a compound tense means that an auxiliary verb is used plus the past participle of the verb conjugated. As for the mood of a verb, the mood reveals the speaker's attitude towards an event. French has 4 personal moods through which the speaker expresses himself: indicative, subjunctive, imperative and conditional moods. So once the concept of conjugation is understood, one realizes that learning verb conjugation can be a daunting task. The fact that every language has hundreds of verbs may intimidate one further. But fortunately, the majority of verbs can be categorized into different groups. Each group has a fixed conjugation pattern which makes it easy for beginners to learn and remember the conjugation. Now that we have a fairly clear idea of what a verb is and what are its functions and conjugation, Let us get back to our lesson on the present tense of ER ending verbs in French. In the French language, there are 4 basic groups of verbs. Each group is categorized by the endings of their infinitives. This table presents the 4 groups and their endings. The first group of verbs ends with ER. The second group ends with IR, and the third ends with RE. And the fourth group, irregular verbs. Each of these groups of verbs have its own rules of conjugation, and each verb within that group follows the same conjugation pattern. Only the fourth group is an exception. All the verbs classified under this group are irregular because they don't have a standard conjugation pattern. In this lesson, we will focus only on the first group verbs. We will also limit our focus to the present tense. The present tense, also known as the present indicative, is a tense that belongs to the indicative mood. The present tense is the most commonly used tense to state a general fact, to describe what you or someone else does, or to express how things are. In the second section of the lesson, I'll introduce you to a couple of commonly used ER ending verbs and their present tense conjugation. Let's begin with the verb parler, which means to speak. When learning the auxiliary verbs in the previous chapter, you found out that in French conjugation there are 8 persons, 4 singular persons which are je, tu, il and elle, and 4 plural persons which are nous, vous, il and elle. Now let us look at the conjugation of the verb parler. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle, elle parle. I'll again read out the conjugation. Listen carefully to the pronunciation because there are silent letters which must not be pronounced. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle, elle parle. So what do we notice here? Firstly, we find that apart from nous parlons and vous parlez, the rest of the conjugation has the same pronunciation. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, il parle and elle parle. The letter S in the second person singular and the letters ENT in the third and fourth person plural are always silent. As for the letter E, remember that it is always silent when it is in the last position. In other words, when a word ends with the letter E, it is the previous letter that is pronounced. In je parle, il parle, elle parle, the words end with an E, but this letter is silent. It is the letter L that precedes it which is pronounced. So in this case, you only hear the L sound at the end of je parle, il parle and elle parle. Now let us turn our attention to nous parlons and vous parlez. In French, the final consonant is usually silent. So similar to the silent S in tu parles, the S in nous parlons is not pronounced. As for the EZ ending, this letter combination is always pronounced as A. So if you remember these points, you can correctly pronounce the conjugation of almost all ER ending verbs that belong to the first group. Now let me show you how the present tense is formed. If you remember this technique, you need not bother much with learning the conjugation by heart. In French, the infinitive form of every verb is composed of two elements, the stem of the verb and the ending. Let me illustrate these two elements with the verb parler. P-A-R-L is the stem of the verb and ER is the ending. Similarly, in the verb téléphoner, which, as you may have correctly guessed, means to telephone somebody, T-E-L-E-P-H-O-N is the stem, while ER is the ending. So, for conjugating a first group verb, identify the stem of the verb and simply replace the ending with E, ES, E, E, ONS, EZ, ENT, ENT. This rule is applicable to all verbs that belong to the first group. Irrespective of the length of the verb, the ending is always the last two letters, which are E and R. The rest of the letters comprise the stem of the verb. But as usual, there are a few exceptions. I'll point out one of them here. Two other exceptions will be explained in the notes. Verbs that end with CER undergo a slight spelling change for the first person plural. Lancer means to throw, and as per the rule mentioned above, we should add the endings ONS to the stem, which is LANC. But because the letter C changes its pronunciation before hard vowels like A, O and U, LANCONS is pronounced as Lancon. In order to rectify the pronunciation, the diacritical mark cedilla is used with the letter C. This addition changes the con sound to son. Let me show you how lancer is conjugated in the present tense. Je lance, tu lances, il lance, elle lance, nous lançons, vous lancez, il lance, elle lance. A similar spelling change occurs with verbs that end with GER. Manger means to eat, and strictly speaking, we should add the endings ONS to the stem, which is MANG. But because the letter G also changes its pronunciation before hard vowels like A, O and U, MANGONS is pronounced as mangon. To retain the j sound, one must add an E after the letter G. Now, MANGEONS is pronounced as mangeons. Now, let's look at the conjugation of manger in the present tense. Je mange, tu manges, il mange, elle mange, nous mangeons, vous mangez, il mange, elle mange. While we are on the subject of spelling changes, let me indicate one more important orthographic change that affects only the first person singular form. When a verb begins with a vowel or a mute H, the letter E from the subject pronoun je is replaced by an apostrophe. We came across this grammatical phenomenon known as elision in the previous chapter. In French, the final vowel from je drops and is replaced by an apostrophe when the following word begins with a vowel or a mute H. The elision does not happen with the subject pronoun tu because the elision occurs only with the vowel e and not with the other 4 vowels. I'll illustrate this point with 2 verbs. The first verb is aimer, which means to like. As you see, aimer begins with a vowel, so the phenomenon of elision must take place. Je aime should change to j'aime. Look at the full conjugation of the verb. J'aime, tu aimes, il aime, elle aime, nous aimons, vous aimez, ils aiment, elles aiment. Now let's proceed to the second verb. Habiter means to live. The H is silent because it is a mute H. Since such an H is similar to a vowel, an elision is required. So we say j'habite instead of je habite. Let me now show you how this verb is conjugated in the present tense. J'habite, tu habites, il habite, elle habite, nous habitons, vous habitez, ils habitent, elles habitent. Now that we have seen how first group verbs are conjugated in the present tense, let me teach you a final thing before we move on to the third section. Knowing the right conjugation of verbs is not enough to make a sentence. One must also know where to place the verb with regard to the subject of the sentence. Generally, the verb is always in the second position. The subject always precedes the verb. Let me give you an example. Let's consider this sentence, I work. This simple sentence is short but grammatically correct. In French, it translates as je travaille. In such sentences, it is easy to know where to place the verb. But what happens when you have a sentence like this? Every Sunday I work in the garden. This sentence translates as chaque dimanche je travaille dans le jardin. The phrase chaque dimanche can be placed at the beginning of the sentence or at the end. Either way, it is the phrase je travaille dans le jardin that is more important. In this phrase, the verb travail is in the second position. Je, which is the subject doing the verb, is in the first position. Before we proceed to the text that reviews what we learned today, let me quickly recapitulate the important points of the present tense of first group verbs. In order to conjugate a verb, one has to first identify the stem. Then the ending, which is er, must be removed and the appropriate verb ending must be added to the stem. The verb endings of first group verbs are e, es, e, ons, ez, ent, ent. Now let us look at the following text, which contains 8 first group verbs. I am going to slowly read out the text so that you can understand how verbs are used in sentence construction. Chaque soir, mes grands-parents écoutent la radio pendant que maman prépare le dîner. Ma sœur aide maman dans la cuisine. Mon frère étudie dans sa chambre. Et moi, je joue dans le salon. À 7 heures, quelqu'un sonne à la porte. Nous regardons tous vers la porte. C'est papa. Il rentre du bureau. With this, we come at the end of our first lesson. This lesson was divided into 3 parts. In the first part, we learnt about the basic concept of verb conjugation and the various types of verbs that exist in French. In the second part, we saw how to conjugate a few commonly used verbs. And finally, in the third part, we summarized today's lesson by studying a text on first group verbs. I hope you enjoyed today's session. In the next lesson, we'll learn the prepositions of possession. I hope to see you in the next class. Thank you. À bientôt. See you soon.